The lights hadn't even finished dimming when something felt off. Not the dramatic kind of off that comes with anticipation. Not the jittery excitement of a premiere night. This was different. This was the kind of unease you feel before a glass shatters in a quiet room. That split second where your body knows something is about to happen, even if your mind can't explain it yet. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because no one came to Sundance that night expecting a reckoning. They came for redemption. They came for optics. They came for a carefully packaged narrative wrapped in indie credibility and snow-dusted prestige. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, stepping onto Sundance ground for the first time, weren't just attending a film festival. They were making a statement. Or at least, they thought they were. Here's the question no one asked out loud that night, but everyone was thinking by the end of it. How did a premiere meant to restore control turn into the moment control slipped away entirely? The room was full, not just physically, but symbolically. Filmmakers, critics, studio executives who pretended not to be studio executives. People who smile politely while mentally calculating leverage. Sundance has always been less about glamour and more about judgment. You don't walk into Park City to be adored. You walk in to be measured. And that's what made this debut so risky. The Sussexes didn't arrive quietly. They arrived deliberately. Coordinated outfits. Carefully timed appearances. A documentary with a title designed to sound playful, disarming, harmless. Cookie Queens. The kind of name that suggests warmth, relatability, and whimsy. The kind of name that doesn't scream controversy, even when controversy has followed you across continents. From the outside, it looked like confidence. Inside the room, it felt like something else. Pressure. You could see it in the way conversations stalled when they entered. Not stopped, stalled. People glanced, recalibrated, lowered their voices. Not out of awe, but calculation. Sundance crowds don't gasp. They assess. And the assessment that night was ongoing, quiet, and merciless. What does it mean when royalty walks into a space built on rebellion? That question hovered over the audience like cold air. The film hadn't even started yet, and already there were whispers. Not the loud, messy kind. The restrained kind. The kind exchanged between people who've been around long enough to know when a narrative is being sold instead of shared. People noticed the extra security. The unusual seating arrangements. The subtle separation between the Sussex entourage and everyone else. It didn't feel like an indie premiere. It felt like a brand activation pretending to be one. And Sundance, for all its politeness, has a long memory when it comes to that. Then the lights went down. The screen flickered on. Cookie Queens began. The audience watched. They laughed in the right places. They shifted in their seats during others. No one booed. No one walked out. But something important happened in that darkness. The room stopped leaning forward. That matters. At Sundance, leaning forward is everything. It means curiosity, engagement, willingness to go where the filmmaker takes you. When a room leans back, arms crossed, legs stretched, eyes drifting. That's not rejection. That's worse. That's detachment. And detachment is fatal. Still, the real moment wasn't in the film. Not yet. Because Sundance premieres aren't judged solely by what's on screen. They're judged by what happens after the credits roll. The applause. The Q&A. The unscripted moments where truth slips through rehearsed answers. When the lights came back on, the applause arrived right on cue. Polite. Respectful. A touch longer than necessary. The kind of applause that says, "We see you," without saying, "We're moved." Prince Harry smiled. Meghan smiled wider. Then the moderator stood. Introductions were made. Thank yous were exchanged. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Until it wasn't. Because somewhere between the second microphone handoff and the third polite chuckle, the temperature in the room shifted. Not dramatically. Subtly. A ripple passed through the crowd as someone stood up who wasn't on the schedule. Amy Redford. Not announced. Not framed. Just standing. And if you didn't know who she was, you knew within seconds that she mattered. Not because of volume. Not because of aggression. But because the room went quiet in a way that only happens when people recognize authority without being told to. This is important to understand. Sundance audiences don't hush themselves for just anyone. They don't pause out of politeness. They pause when something real might happen. Amy Redford didn't rush. She didn't posture. She didn't smile nervously. She held the microphone the way someone does when they're not asking for permission. Her opening line sounded harmless enough, almost playful, a nod to the evening, a brief acknowledgement of the film. The crowd relaxed. You could feel it. A few smiles returned. A few shoulders dropped. And then came the sentence. The one no one had prepared for. The one that landed not like a punch, but like a mirror. Duchess of Yacht. 3 words. Delivered lightly, almost casually. No raised voice. No visible malice. Just enough timing to make it unmistakable. The reaction was immediate and delayed at the same time. Laughter burst out, reflexive, surprised, unfiltered. Then it caught in people's throats. You could hear it happen. The sound of amusement colliding with realization. Did she really just say that? On the stage? About her? Meghan's smile froze. Not vanished. Froze. The difference matters. Freezing is an attempt to hold control when something slips. Prince Harry's head turned slightly, then stilled. His expression didn't change much, but his posture did. He leaned back, not forward. Amy Redford didn't linger. She didn't explain the joke. She didn't clarify. She let it sit there, suspended, heavy with implication. Then she handed the microphone back as if she'd just asked a perfectly normal question. That was the brilliance of it. Because the phrase didn't need explanation. Not in that room. Not in that industry. Everyone knew exactly what had been invoked. Not a rumor, not a headline, but a long-running, unspoken undercurrent that polite society pretends not to notice. And that's why it hurt. You could see the audience recalculating in real time. Eyes darting. Expressions tightening. Some people looked down. Others looked straight ahead, as if refusing to participate in the moment might erase it. But moments like that don't erase. They embed. The moderator stumbled. Not dramatically, just enough to signal uncertainty. A joke was attempted. It landed flat. The energy had shifted, and no amount of professional smoothing could bring it back to where it had been. Meghan spoke next. Or tried to. Her words were measured. Calm. Gracious. But something had changed. The cadence was different. The warmth felt applied rather than organic. The audience listened, but they were no longer receiving. They were analyzing. That's the moment a narrative starts to crack. And here's the contradiction no one wants to admit. The roast didn't derail the evening because it was cruel. It derailed it because it felt honest. Not necessarily true in a factual sense, but true in the way that jokes sometimes reveal what people are already thinking but haven't said. That's why no one booed Amy Redford. That's why no one rushed to defend Meghan in the room. Silence followed not because people were offended, but because they were processing. And processing is dangerous when you're trying to control a story. By the time the Q&A ended, something irreversible had happened. The premiere was over, but the conversation was just beginning. Not out loud. Not yet. But in glances exchanged. In phones discreetly checked. In messages typed under coats and tables. The Sussexes exited the stage the same way they entered it. Composed, dignified, visually intact. But control doesn't shatter loudly. It slips quietly. And backstage, where no cameras were allowed and no narratives were curated, the night was only beginning. Because what happened after the applause faded would reveal just how deep that single line had cut, and why Sundance 2026 would be remembered not for a documentary premiere, but for a moment no one could spin away. The gamble started long before anyone stepped onto a stage. Here's the part most people miss when they replay that night in their heads. Sundance wasn't chosen because it was friendly. It was chosen because it was unforgiving. And when you walk into an unforgiving room voluntarily, you're either incredibly confident or desperately trying to prove something. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle didn't arrive at the Sundance Film Festival by accident. This wasn't a casual stop on a publicity tour. It was a calculated move, months in the making, debated behind closed doors by advisors who understood one brutal truth about Hollywood. If you can survive Sundance, you can survive anything. But surviving isn't the same as winning. Sundance is not Cannes. It's not Venice. It doesn't reward spectacle. It rewards credibility. And credibility, once questioned, is nearly impossible to reclaim inside that ecosystem. So why go there? Why step into a space built by outsiders, guarded by purists, and populated by people who pride themselves on sniffing out inauthenticity? The answer is uncomfortable, and that's why no one said it out loud. Because Sundance still meant legitimacy. For years, The Sussex brand had orbited around mainstream platforms. Big deals, big headlines, big promises. But something had shifted. The applause had softened. The novelty had thinned. And quietly, almost imperceptibly, the industry had begun to lean back instead of in. That's when Sundance entered the conversation. Insiders will tell you this. Sundance is where reputations are either cleansed or confirmed. You don't go there to be liked. You go there to be judged by people who believe they can't be bought. And that belief makes them dangerous. From the moment the documentary was accepted into the festival lineup, eyebrows went up. Not outrage. Not anger. Suspicion. Why this film? Why now? Why here? Cookie Queens was framed as intimate, playful, human. A departure from the grand narratives and heavy themes people associated with the Sussexes. On paper, it sounded smart. A tonal reset. A chance to appear small again. But Sundance audiences are allergic to strategy dressed as vulnerability. And that allergy was already flaring before a single frame played. Behind the scenes, festival staff faced a dilemma they'd rather not discuss publicly. Security requests exceeded the norm. Media coordination came with unusual stipulations. Seating arrangements were delicate. The word used internally wasn't difficult. It was different. Different is a warning sign at Sundance. Because the festival was built as an antidote to hierarchy. You stand in line like everyone else. You answer questions like everyone else. You bleed creatively like everyone else. When someone arrives with layers of insulation, physical or reputational, it disrupts the ecosystem. That disruption was felt early. At private industry dinners leading up to the premiere, conversations stalled when the Sussexes' name came up. Not arguments. Pauses. Shrugs. People choosing their words carefully, as if the topic itself was unstable ground. One veteran producer reportedly said something that circulated quietly among insiders. This feels less like a film premiere and more like a referendum. That wasn't meant as praise. Because a referendum implies sides. And Sundance does not like being asked to pick one. The gamble, whether Harry and Meghan realized it fully or not, was that Sundance would see past everything else. Past the headlines. Past the fatigue. Past the skepticism. That the film would speak louder than the context. But context is everything at Sundance. And the context was heavy. There was the lingering perception of overexposure. The sense that every appearance came preloaded with messaging. The belief, fair or not, that authenticity had become performative. None of this was shouted. None of it was tweeted. It lived in the quiet spaces where opinions actually form. Then there was the deeper issue no one wanted to touch directly. Hierarchy. Royalty, even symbolic royalty, carries an imbalance that Sundance instinctively resists. The festival was founded to elevate voices without power. To challenge institutions, not platform them. When someone arrives already amplified, already protected, already famous beyond the film itself, it creates tension. And tension doesn't dissolve just because someone smiles. Harry and Meghan's arrival in Park City was tightly choreographed. They didn't hide, but they didn't mingle freely either. There were controlled moments, controlled angles, controlled access. From a public relations standpoint, it was flawless. From a Sundance standpoint, it felt distant. People noticed who didn't approach them, who didn't ask questions, who kept conversations brief, not because of fear, but because of disinterest mixed with caution. And that's a dangerous combination, because disinterest is silent. It doesn't protest. It doesn't argue. It simply withdraws. The screening venue filled quickly, not out of excitement alone, but curiosity. Everyone wanted to see how this would play out. Would the film disarm the skeptics? Would it surprise them? Would it justify its presence? Or would it confirm what many quietly suspected? As the lights dimmed, there was a sense of expectation, but not the kind filmmakers dream of. This wasn't hope. This was scrutiny. The opening moments of the film were met with polite engagement. A few laughs landed. A few emotional beats registered. But something else was happening beneath the surface. The audience was watching not just the story, but the intent behind it. Is this honest? Or is it strategic? That question followed every scene. And when audiences asked that question, they stopped surrendering. By the midpoint of the film, the energy had stabilized into something neutral. Not hostile, not warm, neutral, which, at Sundance, is its own kind of verdict. Because Sundance doesn't reward neutrality. It rewards risk. When the credits rolled, applause came, but it rose evenly, not explosively. People clapped because that's what you do, not because they were compelled. Harry looked relieved. Meghan looked confident. On the surface, the gamble appeared to be holding. But the most dangerous moments are the ones that feel stable right before they collapse. Because Sundance doesn't reveal its judgment immediately. It waits. It listens. It observes what happens when the unscripted parts begin. And that's where the Sussex gamble truly began. Because the Q&A wasn't just a formality. It was a test. A test of humility. Of openness. Of whether the people on stage understood the room they were in, or whether they believed the room should understand them. And standing in that audience, microphone in hand, was someone who understood Sundance far better than anyone realized. Someone who didn't know the Sussexes anything. Someone who wasn't impressed by optics. Someone who would, in a matter of seconds, turn a calculated gamble into an uncontrolled moment. But no one knew that yet. They were still clapping, still smiling, still pretending the night was unfolding exactly as planned. And that illusion, fragile, beautiful, and temporary, was about to shatter. Because the moment Amy Redford stood up, the gamble stopped being theoretical, and the consequences became unavoidable.